She didn't say it to a camera. She didn't post it online. She whispered it to a teammate in a hallway most people will never see, in a moment she thought would stay private forever. But in women's basketball right now, nothing about Caitlin Clark stays private. Not her warm-ups. Not her mistakes. Not her frustrations. And definitely not the exact second she reached her breaking point with the people who were supposed to protect her. 2 words left her mouth in San Juan. I quit. And before she even made it back to her hotel room, those words had already detonated across every social media platform, every sports news desk, every group chat of people who barely watched the WNBA but suddenly had an opinion about what happened inside that Team USA facility. No video. No context. No official statement from anyone involved. Just a rumor moving at the speed of wildfire through a sport that was already sitting on a powder keg. And here's what made it different from every other athlete drama you've seen this year. The reaction wasn't about what she said. It was about who she is, what she represents, and how impossible the situation around her had become. Because when the highest paid, most watched, most scrutinized player in women's basketball walks away from representing her country, it's not a meltdown. It's a message. And the people in charge spent exactly 0 seconds asking what that message was trying to tell them. They went straight to damage control. Straight to spin. Straight to the same old playbook they always use when a superstar refuses to stay quiet and play along. But this time the playbook didn't work. This time the fans weren't buying it. The media wasn't buying it. And most importantly, the players who've been dealing with this exact system for years finally had someone with enough gravity to say out loud what they'd been whispering in locker rooms since forever. That USA basketball doesn't treat its stars like partners. It treats them like assets. And Caitlin Clark just became the first one powerful enough to walk away. Now let me be clear about something before we go any further. This was not a spontaneous emotional outburst. This was not a bad day. This was not some rookie getting overwhelmed by the pressure of international competition. Caitlin Clark doesn't crack under pressure. We know this. We've watched her dismantle defenses and sold out arenas with the entire country watching. We've watched her hit game winners while getting double-teamed by defenders who've been in the league for a decade. Pressure is not her problem. The problem was everything that led up to that moment in San Juan. The decisions that were made without her input. The coaching staff that was assembled without her voice in the room. The system she was expected to fit into that was built for a version of women's basketball that doesn't exist anymore. Because here's what nobody wanted to admit when the roster was announced. Caitlin Clark just changed the entire financial and cultural trajectory of the WNBA in one season. She turned the league into must-watch television. She brought corporate sponsors who'd ignored women's basketball for 30 years. She filled buildings in cities that used to treat WNBA games like a scheduling afterthought. She didn't just have a good rookie year. She rewrote what was possible. And USA Basketball responded by treating her exactly the same way they've treated every other player for the last 20 years. Like she should be grateful for the opportunity. Like she should fall in line. Like her value to the sport somehow made her less entitled to respect, not more. They didn't build around her. They didn't adjust for her. They didn't even pretend to care what kind of basketball would let her be the player who just lit the entire league on fire. They handed her a roster, a coaching staff, and a system, and expected her to smile and make it work. And when she couldn't, when the whole thing became so suffocating and so misaligned with everything she'd just accomplished that staying felt like betraying herself, she said 2 words and walked out. Now here's where it gets complicated. Because the version of this story you heard on ESPN, the version you saw in press conferences, the version USA Basketball wanted you to believe, none of it was true. The official story was simple, plain, controlled, carefully coordinated between USA Basketball's PR team and every major sports outlet that needed a headline by morning. Caitlin Clark withdraws from Team USA consideration to focus on rest and recovery after a historic rookie season. That's what they told you. That's what ran on SportsCenter. That's what got tweeted by reporters who should have known better. That's what your uncle shared on Facebook with a caption about how athletes today don't have the same competitive fire. 1 sentence. 0 follow-up questions. Case closed. And if you didn't know any better, if you just scrolled past it while waiting for your coffee order, you'd think it was perfectly normal. Rookie has incredible season. Rookie is tired. Rookie takes a break. Everyone moves on. Except that's not what happened. Not even close. Because 3 days before that statement went out, Caitlin Clark was in San Juan, Puerto Rico, going through Team USA training camp with every intention of making that Olympic roster. She wasn't questioning whether she wanted to be there. She was questioning whether the people running the program had any idea what they were doing. And the answer she kept getting over and over in a dozen different ways was no, they didn't. Start with the coaching staff. Cheryl Reeve, legendary coach, multiple championships, absolute icon of the game. No debate about her resume. But here's what nobody wanted to say out loud during the selection process. Cheryl Reeve coaches the Minnesota Lynx. Caitlin Clark just spent an entire season destroying the Minnesota Lynx. Not just beating them, humiliating them. Dropping 40-point games on their home court while their fans sat in stunned silence watching a rookie do things their Hall of Fame coach had no answer for. And now that same coach was supposed to build an offense around her? Now that same coach was supposed to put aside every competitive instinct, every ego, every moment of getting torched by this 22-year-old kid, and just hand her the keys to Team USA's system? You see the problem yet? Because Caitlin saw it immediately. First practice in San Juan, she's running through sets that look like they were designed in 2008. Slow, methodical, built around post touches and mid-range jumpers and a pace of play that would put a modern NBA coach to sleep. This is not how Caitlin Clark plays basketball. This is not how the Indiana Fever just sold out 43 consecutive games. This is not how women's basketball became the fastest growing sports product in America. But this is how USA basketball has always done it, and this is how Cheryl Reeve knows how to win, and this is the system Caitlin was expected to shrink herself into. No adjustments, no conversations, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the player who just changed the entire sport might know something about what works. Just run the plays, hit your spots, don't freelance, be grateful you're here. Second day of camp it got worse, because it wasn't just the offensive system that felt wrong. It was who they were asking her to share the court with. Now listen carefully because this is where it gets messy. The roster USA basketball assembled for this camp was not built to win. It was built to satisfy obligations, to check boxes, to make sure certain veterans got their moment, certain coaches got their favorites, certain political debts inside the organization got paid. And Caitlin Clark, the player who just averaged 28 points and 8 assists while leading the league in virtually every watchability metric that matters, was expected to make it all work. She was supposed to defer to players who couldn't shoot like her. She was supposed to slow down for players who couldn't keep up with her. She was supposed to run sets designed for a version of basketball that her entire rookie season just proved was outdated. And when she asked why, when she tried to have a conversation about how this team could actually function at the highest level, she got the answer every young superstar in every sport eventually gets. This is how we've always done it. 4 practices in, she went to the coaching staff. Not to complain. Not to demand changes. Just to ask questions. Could we push the pace more? Could we run some sets that let me create? She didn't even finish the sentence. Cheryl Reeve cut her off mid-word with a look that could freeze water. We're not redesigning the offense around one player. One player. That's what she called her. Not the generational talent who just became the first rookie in WNBA history to sell out arenas in cities that didn't even know they had a team. Not the player who quadrupled the league's television ratings. Not the person who made Nike write the biggest shoe deal in women's basketball history before she'd played a single professional game. One player. Like she was some rotation piece asking for extra touches. And that's when Caitlin knew. This wasn't about basketball. This was about something way deeper, way darker, and way more broken than offensive schemes or roster construction. This was about power. And who gets to keep it? Because here's what USA basketball couldn't say out loud but everybody in that gym understood. If they built the team around Caitlin Clark, if they adjusted their entire system to maximize what made her special, if they admitted that the old way of doing things was actively making the team worse, then they'd have to admit something that would crack the foundation of how women's basketball has operated for decades. That the gatekeepers don't know better than the game itself. That the coaches who've been running these programs since the 90s might not be the best people to lead basketball in 2024. That maybe, just maybe, the 22-year-old kid who just changed everything knows something they don't. And they would rather lose with the old system than win with hers. That realization hit Caitlin somewhere around day 5. She tried one more time. Pulled aside one of the assistant coaches after practice, somebody she thought might actually listen. Somebody who texted her congratulations after she broke the rookie scoring record. Somebody who seemed like they understood what was happening to the sport. She laid it out simply. I'm not trying to take over. I'm not trying to disrespect the veterans. I just think we could be so much better if we played to our actual strengths instead of pretending it's still 2016. The assistant coach nodded, smiled, said all the right things, then did absolutely nothing. Because that coach had to go back to Cheryl Reeve's staff meetings. Had to sit in rooms where decisions got made. had to protect their own position in a system that rewards loyalty and punishes anyone who rocks the boat. And Caitlin Clark was asking her to capsize the entire ship. So nothing changed. Day 6 they scrimmaged. First team versus second team, full contact, coaches watching everything. Caitlin got the ball at the top of the key with space to operate. Did exactly what she's done 1,000 times. Pulled up from 30 feet, barely broke rhythm, sent it through the net so clean the sound echoed off the practice facility walls. Cheryl Reeve blew the whistle. That's not the shot we drew up. Caitlin stared at her. It went in. That's not the point. And there it was. The entire problem crystallized in 4 words. It didn't matter that the shot went in. It didn't matter that she'd hit that exact shot in sold-out arenas against the best defenders in the world. It didn't matter that her ability to make that shot was literally the reason millions of people had started watching women's basketball in the first place. What mattered was the system. What mattered was control. What mattered was making sure Caitlin Clark understood that no matter how much she'd accomplished, no matter how much she'd changed, no matter how valuable she was to the sport, inside this program, she was just another player who needed to do what she was told. That night, Caitlin called her agent. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Most of it was her just venting, processing, trying to make sense of how something that should have been the highlight of her year had turned into the most frustrating basketball experience of her life. But somewhere in that call, something shifted. Her agent asked a question that cut through everything. What do you actually owe them? Silence. Because Caitlin had been operating under the assumption that representing your country was an honor you didn't turn down. That playing for Team USA was the ultimate goal every player was supposed to want. That if you were good enough to get the call, you showed up and you made it work no matter what. But her agent's question flipped the entire framework. What did she actually owe them? USA Basketball didn't make her a star. She did that herself. They didn't build the audience that now followed every game she played. She earned that through 4 years at Iowa playing a style of basketball so electric that people who'd never watched women's sports became obsessed. They didn't create her value. They wanted to extract it. And suddenly, sitting in that hotel room in San Juan with practice gear still damp from another day of running plays designed to minimize everything that made her special, Caitlin saw the whole thing clearly for the first time. This wasn't an opportunity. This was a trap. Because if she stayed, if she swallowed her frustration and played their way and helped Team USA win gold while subordinating everything that made her transcendent, the narrative would be that the system worked. That Cheryl Reeve was right to make her adjust. That the old guard knew best. That Caitlin Clark was great, sure, but she still needed the structure and discipline and wisdom of coaches who'd been doing this since before she was born. And if they lost? If the team struggled because they were running an offense that made their best player ordinary, because they'd assembled a roster based on politics instead of fit, because they prioritized ego over excellence, that would be her fault too. The blame would land on the one player who tried to say something, who asked questions, who didn't just shut up and follow orders. Either way, she couldn't win. Either way, the system that had just spent an entire WNBA season being exposed as outdated would get to protect itself. Her agent knew it too. You don't need them, she said quietly. They need you. Day 7 started like all the others. Shoot around at 9. Film session at 11. Practice at 2. Caitlin showed up on time. Went through the warm-ups. Took her spot in the drills. But something was different. The other players felt it first. She wasn't talking. Wasn't joking around during water breaks. Wasn't doing the little things that make a team feel like a team instead of just 12 people running plays. She was there in body but checked out in every way that mattered. And when they scrimmaged that afternoon, when she got the ball and had 3 different opportunities to do something spectacular, she didn't take any of them. She passed. She moved without the ball. She ran the plays exactly how they were drawn up. She played like every other good player instead of the best player in the world. Cheryl Reeve didn't say anything. Maybe she thought she'd finally broken through. Finally gotten Caitlin to buy into the system. Finally taught this rookie that there's a right way to do things and individual brilliance doesn't matter if it disrupts team chemistry. Or maybe she knew exactly what was happening and just didn't care. Because after practice, Caitlin didn't shower with the team. She didn't go to the meal everybody was supposed to attend together. She went straight back to her room, sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands, and stared at the USA Basketball logo on her warm-up jacket hanging in the closet. She thought about her dad. About growing up in Iowa watching Team USA win gold after gold after gold. About dreaming of wearing that jersey herself one day. About how much it would have meant to 10-year-old Caitlin to know she'd make it here. But 10-year-old Caitlin didn't know what it would cost. She didn't know that making it to the top of women's basketball meant discovering that the top was guarded by people who saw her as a threat instead of an asset. She didn't know that being the best would make her dangerous to the very people who were supposed to celebrate her. She didn't know that changing the sport would mean fighting everyone who benefited from it staying exactly the same. And she definitely didn't know that representing your country could feel like betraying yourself. 30 minutes later, there was a knock on her door. Caitlin almost didn't answer, but she did. And standing in the hallway was Diana Taurasi, the legend, the all-time. Diana Taurasi didn't wait for an invitation. She walked past Caitlin into the hotel room, glanced around like she was checking for cameras, then sat down in the chair by the window. "Close the door," she said. Not a request, a command. Caitlin hesitated for half a second, then did it. Diana leaned back, arms crossed, studying her the way a veteran studies a rookie who just did something that can't be taken back. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question, a statement. Caitlin didn't respond right away. Didn't know if she should lie, deflect, or just admit what had been building inside her chest for 7 straight days. "I don't know yet," she finally said. Diana laughed. "Sure. Bitter. Yes, you do. I've seen that look before. Hell, I've worn that look before." She leaned forward. "You think you're the first superstar who showed up here and realized this whole thing is theater?" Caitlin sat down on the bed across from her. "Then why do you keep coming back?" The question landed harder than she meant it to. Diana's expression shifted. Something between respect and exhaustion. "Because I'm 42 years old and I've already made every mistake you're about to make." She paused. "And because when I was your age, I didn't have the power to walk away. You do." Silence filled the room like a third person. "They're going to destroy you for this," Diana said quietly. "You know that, right?" Caitlin nodded. "They're going to say you're selfish, that you don't care about your country, that you can't handle the pressure of playing with the best." Diana's voice was steady but laced with something darker. "They're going to question your character, your commitment, your leadership. They're going to make sure every headline reinforces that you quit on your team." "I know. And you're still going to do it." It wasn't a question this time either. Because Diana Taurasi had been in women's basketball long enough to recognize the exact moment when a player stops caring what the system thinks and starts protecting what matters. Caitlin looked at her directly. "Did they do this to you?" Diana smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Worse. They convinced me I needed them more than they needed me. Took me 15 years to realize that was a lie." She stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the San Juan skyline. "You're 22. You just became the most valuable player in women's basketball history. And they're trying to make you small. So what do I do?" Diana turned around. "You do exactly what you're already planning to do. You walk out. You don't apologize. You don't explain. You let them scramble to control a narrative they can't control." She moved toward the door. "But here's the part nobody's going to tell you." She stopped. "When you leave, you're not just leaving a roster spot open. You're forcing every player in that locker room to choose a side. You're exposing every coach who stays silent. You're making USA Basketball defend a system that everyone knows is broken but nobody's been powerful enough to challenge." Caitlin felt her heart rate spike. "They'll blame me for all of it." "They will," Diana said. "Until they can't anymore." She opened the door. "One more thing. Whatever you decide, don't tell them you're leaving. Don't give them time to spin it first." She looked back. "Just disappear. Let them explain your absence to a sold-out arena's worth of reporters who all want to know where the biggest star in the sport went." Then she was gone. Caitlin sat there for 20 minutes trying to process what just happened. Diana Taurasi, the player every young guard grew up idolizing, just gave her permission to blow up the most prestigious program in women's basketball. Not just permission, a strategy. She picked up her phone, opened her texts, scrolled to her agent's name, typed 4 words. "Get me out tonight." The response came back in seconds. "Already working on it." 3 hours later, Caitlin Clark was in the back of a car heading. The airport was 40 minutes away. Caitlin spent 38 of them staring out the window watching San Juan blur past in streaks of lights and colors that didn't register as anything real. Her phone was off. Deliberately. Completely. Because the second USA Basketball realized she wasn't at the team dinner, wasn't in her room, wasn't answering calls, the messages would start coming. The damage control would begin. The pressure campaign would launch. And she needed to be unreachable when it did. Her agent had handled the logistics with surgical precision. Flight booked under a name that wouldn't flag any systems. Exit row seat on a red-eye that left in 90 minutes. A connection through Atlanta that would get her back to Indianapolis by morning. No paper trail. No leaked itinerary. No chance for cameras to be waiting at the gate. By the time USA Basketball figured out what happened, she'd already be gone. The car pulled up to departures. Caitlin grabbed her bag, packed in 7 minutes with the essentials and nothing else, and stepped out into humid Caribbean air that felt nothing like the Midwest she was desperate to get back to. The driver didn't say anything, didn't ask questions, just popped the trunk and drove away the second she cleared the curb. She was alone now. Completely, terrifyingly alone in a decision that would define everything that came next. And as she walked through those airport doors, head down, hat pulled low, the full weight of what she'd just done started to settle in her chest like concrete. She wasn't coming back to this team. She wasn't representing her country in the Olympics. She wasn't doing what every coach, every parent, every motivational poster in every gym she'd ever played in said you were supposed to do when you reached the pinnacle of your sport. She was walking away. Not because she couldn't handle it. Not because she was tired. Not because she didn't want to compete at the highest level. But because the highest level had revealed itself to be a broken system run by people more interested in control than excellence. And she refused to be the next generational talent who sacrificed who she was to make them comfortable. Security line was empty at this hour. She moved through it quickly, efficiently, trying not to make eye contact with anyone who might recognize her face. But halfway to the gate, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd forgotten to power it all the way down. One notification. One text. From a number she didn't have saved but recognized instantly from the area code. Minnesota. She stopped walking. Opened the message. 5 words from Cheryl Reeve. We need to talk. Now. Caitlin stared at the screen. Part of her wanted to respond. Wanted to explain. Wanted to lay out every frustration, every moment of disrespect, every reason why staying would have been worse than leaving. But Diana's voice echoed in her head. Don't give them time to spin it first. She powered the phone completely off. Kept walking. 20 minutes later she was at the gate, boarding pass in hand, watching the earliest passengers file onto a plane that would take her as far from this disaster as commercial aviation allowed. Nobody recognized her. Nobody stopped her. Nobody asked why the face of women's basketball was flying coach on a Thursday night with a duffel bag and running shoes still covered in practice facility dust. She found her seat. Window. Last row. Sat down and closed her eyes and tried to quiet the part of her brain that was already screaming about what the next 72 hours would look like. The media firestorm. The think pieces. The former players who'd never accomplished half of what she had explaining why she made the wrong choice. The fans who'd turn on her because walking away from Team USA was the one thing you weren't allowed to do without being labeled soft, selfish, or broken. She knew it was coming. All of it. And she'd decided it was still worth it. The plane pushed back from the gate at 11:47 p.m. By 11:52 they were airborne. By midnight, Caitlin Clark was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean with her entire professional reputation about to nosedive in the opposite direction. And back in San Juan, in a team facility that suddenly felt a lot emptier, Cheryl Reeve was standing in front of the remaining players with a microphone in her hand and a script she'd been handed by USA Basketball's PR director 17 minutes ago. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of feet from players who knew something was very, very wrong but hadn't been told what yet. Diana Taurasi stood in the back with her arms crossed, watching. We're going to address this once, Cheryl began, her voice controlled but tight. And then we're moving forward as a team. Nobody moved. Caitlin Clark has decided to withdraw from Team USA consideration effective immediately. She cited the need for rest and recovery after a demanding rookie season, and we respect her decision. The lie hung in the air like smoke. 3 players in the front row exchanged glances. One of them, a veteran who'd been around long enough to know what official statements actually meant, started to say something, then stopped. We have a deep roster, Cheryl continued, reading from the talking points like she was trying to convince herself. We have plenty of talent in this room. This doesn't change our goals or our timeline. We're still building toward gold. From the back, Diana's voice cut through. Where is she now? Cheryl's jaw tightened. That's not relevant to where she. The room shifted. Everyone turned to look at Diana, then back at Cheryl, then back at Diana. This wasn't just a player asking a question. This was a legend calling bullshit on a cover story that insulted everyone's intelligence. Cheryl set down the microphone. She left the facility without informing the coaching staff. We discovered she was gone when she missed the team dinner. Her agent confirmed approximately 40 minutes ago that she's withdrawn from consideration and is returning home. Did you talk to her before she left? Diana asked. That's between. Did anyone in this building talk to her before she walked out? Silence. And in that silence, every player in that room understood exactly what had happened. Caitlin Clark didn't quit because she was tired. She quit because something in this program broke her enough that leaving felt like the only option that didn't require destroying herself. And now the coaches were standing in front of them pretending it was about rest. One of the younger players raised her hand tentatively. Are we allowed to talk to her? Cheryl's expression flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough for everyone to see that this question scared her more than anything else that had happened tonight. You're not prohibited from personal communication, she said carefully. But I would encourage everyone to focus on the team we have here and the work we need to do. Translation: don't ask her what really happened. Don't give her a platform. Don't let this turn into something bigger than we can control. But it was already too big. Because while Cheryl Reeve was giving that speech in San Juan, while USA Basketball's PR team was drafting statements and coordinating talking points with friendly media outlets, while coaches were frantically trying to figure out how to explain this to sponsors and Olympic committees and everyone else who'd built their plans around having the most marketable player in women's basketball on the roster, Caitlin Clark's phone was lighting up with messages she couldn't see. 300 texts in the first hour alone. Teammates from Indiana. Friends from Iowa. Players she'd competed against who suddenly understood something they'd all felt but never been able to name. And one message that came in at 1:47 a.m. from a number that made her agent immediately forward it to her lawyer. It was from USA Basketball's executive director. Not asking questions. Not offering support. Not trying to understand what had gone wrong. Just 4 sentences that made the entire situation crystallize into exactly what it had always been. Your withdrawal creates significant complications for our program. We'll need you to participate in a press conference explaining your decision. This isn't optional. Call me by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Her agent read it twice. Then typed back a response that would get forwarded to 9 different people within USA Basketball's leadership before sunrise. Caitlin will be making no statements at this time. Any press conferences will be conducted without her participation. All future communication should go through this email address. Thank you. Professional. Polite. Absolute. And completely unacceptable to an organization that had spent 30 years controlling every narrative around. The message detonated inside USA Basketball headquarters at 6:23 a.m. Eastern Time. Not because of what it said. Because of what it meant. Caitlin Clark wasn't going to help them clean this up. She wasn't going to stand at a podium and deliver the carefully crafted statement they'd already written for her. She wasn't going to smile and deflect and use words like difficult decision and grateful for the opportunity, while they controlled the camera angles and the question queue and every single element that might make this look like anything other than what it was. A complete system failure. And now they had to explain it without her. By 7 a.m., 3 different news outlets already had the story. Not the official version. The real one. Because here's what USA Basketball didn't account for in their damage control playbook. Caitlin Clark had just spent an entire WNBA season making friends with every beat reporter, every social media journalist, every independent commentator who'd been covering women's basketball like it actually mattered. And those people weren't loyal to the institution. They were loyal to the story. The first report hit ESPN at 7:14 a.m. Sources close to the situation say Clark's departure wasn't about rest. It was about fundamental disagreements with coaching philosophy and roster construction. Carefully worded. Properly sourced. Impossible to deny without making it worse. The second report came from The Athletic at 7:31 a.m. Multiple players from the San Juan training camp describe a tense environment where Clark's input was repeatedly dismissed by coaching staff. That one included quotes. Anonymous but specific enough that everyone inside that facility would know exactly who said what. The third report was from an independent women's basketball podcast that had 60,000 followers yesterday and would have 300,000 by the end of the week. And that report didn't dance around anything. Caitlin Clark walked out of Team USA because Cheryl Reeve tried to make the best player in the world play like it's 2012. And USA Basketball is about to learn what happens when you disrespect someone who doesn't need you anymore. That's when the internet exploded. Not slowly. Not gradually building throughout the news cycle. Instantly. Completely. With the kind of intensity that only happens when millions of people who've been watching something build for months finally get confirmation that what they suspected was true. The WNBA's new fans. The ones who discovered women's basketball through Caitlin, who'd bought jerseys and tickets and league pass subscriptions specifically to watch her play, weren't interested in USA Basketball's official narrative. They wanted to know why the organization treated their favorite player like an inconvenience. And they wanted blood. By 9 a.m., #IStandWithCaitlin was trending #1 worldwide. By 10 a.m., there were 3 separate Change.org petitions demanding Cheryl Reeves' resignation. By 11 a.m., ESPN had already scheduled a special segment for that afternoon titled, Team USA's Caitlin Clark Crisis. What really happened? And by noon, when USA Basketball's executive director finally held the press conference they'd been planning since 2 a.m., the room was packed with reporters who had zero interest in accepting whatever sanitized version of events they'd prepared. First question out of the gate came from a reporter who'd been covering women's basketball for 20 years. Can you explain why the most valuable player in the WNBA felt she had no choice but to leave your program? The executive director, a man named Richard Chin who'd been in this position for 6 years without ever facing a crisis like this, cleared his throat. As we stated earlier, Caitlin made a personal decision to prioritize her health and recovery after an intensive season. We support her in that choice, and that's not what players from the camp are saying. The room shifted. Richard's expression tightened. I'm not going to respond to anonymous sources or speculation about. It's not speculation if there are multiple corroborating accounts. Another reporter jumped in before Richard could respond. Did anyone from your coaching staff or leadership team speak with Caitlin before she left San Juan? Pause. Too long of a pause. The coaching staff was not made aware of her decision until after she departed the facility. So nobody tried to stop her? We respect our athletes' autonomy to make decisions about their. Richard Chin was still fumbling through his answer when a reporter in the third row stood up. Not to ask a question, to make a statement. You're asking us to believe that the player who just became the biggest star in women's basketball history walked out of your program without a single conversation, and nobody thought to get on a plane and figure out what happened? The room went silent. Because that question, the one USA Basketball had been desperately hoping nobody would ask, exposed the entire foundation of their defense. They weren't treating Caitlin Clark like a generational talent they couldn't afford to lose. They were treating her like a problem they were relieved to be rid of. Richard's face went through 3 different expressions in 2 seconds. We have protocols for. Your protocols just cost you the Olympics, someone shouted from the back. And that's when it happened. The moment USA Basketball realized they weren't managing a PR crisis anymore. They were fighting for survival. Because the Olympics were 4 months away. And every major sports network, every corporate sponsor, every casual fan who just discovered women's basketball was asking the same question. Who wants to watch Team USA without Caitlin Clark? Ratings projections got revised downward within hours. Ticket sales for the send-off games in London? Soft. Corporate hospitality packages that were supposed to be slam dunks? Suddenly full of executives asking if they could shift their investment to other Olympic sports. The economic impact wasn't just significant. It was catastrophic. And it was happening in real time while Richard Chin stood at a podium trying to convince people that losing the most marketable athlete in women's basketball was somehow part of the plan. By the time the press conference ended, 37 minutes of increasingly hostile questions that Richard handled like a man drowning in quicksand, the narrative was already set. USA Basketball didn't just fail Caitlin Clark. They exposed how little they valued the player who'd saved their entire sport from irrelevance. Meanwhile, somewhere over Georgia, Caitlin's phone powered back on. 419 notifications hit her screen simultaneously. Text messages, missed calls, Instagram DMs. Twitter mentions that crashed her app twice trying to load them all. She scrolled through the first dozen. Her parents, her college teammates, players from every WNBA team she'd faced this season. Reporters asking for comment. Brands asking if she was okay. Fans sending support that ranged from heartfelt to violently protective. And then one message that stopped her cold. From Angel Reese. They did the same thing to me in college. Called me emotional. Said I needed to calm down. Made me feel crazy for wanting respect. You're not crazy. And you're not alone. Caitlin stared at those words until her vision blurred. Because here's what nobody outside of women's basketball understood about what just happened. This wasn't about one player having a bad week at training camp. This was about every woman who'd ever been told she was too much, too loud, too demanding, too unwilling to just be grateful for the opportunity. Every player who'd been asked to shrink herself to make insecure coaches comfortable. Every athlete who'd been punished for having standards higher than the people in charge. Caitlin Clark just became the first one powerful enough to say no. And she did it at the exact moment when the entire sports world was watching. Her agent called as the plane started its descent into Atlanta. "You need to see something," she said, voice tight with something Caitlin couldn't quite identify. "What?" "Nike just released a statement." Caitlin's stomach dropped. Nike was her signature sponsor. The company that had bet everything on her before she'd played a single WNBA game. The brand that had tied their entire women's basketball strategy to her face, her story, her credibility. If Nike backed away now, if they got nervous about the controversy, if they started hedging their investment, if they decided she was too risky. "They're supporting you," her agent said quickly. "Completely. Publicly. They just posted it 10 minutes ago." Caitlin exhaled. "What does it say?" Her agent read it verbatim. "Nike supports Caitlin Clark's decision to prioritize her well-being and her standards for excellence. The future of women's basketball isn't about conforming to the past, it's about building something better. And we're proud to build it with her." 23 words that changed everything. Because Nike didn't just support her decision. They validated it. They told the world that walking away from a broken system wasn't weakness, it was leadership. And within hours, other brands followed. Gatorade, State Farm, Wilson. Every company that had watched Caitlin Clark turn women's basketball into a cultural phenomenon suddenly understood something USA Basketball still hadn't figured out. She wasn't just a player anymore. She was the market. By the time Caitlin landed in Indianapolis, the entire conversation had shifted. It wasn't about whether she made the right choice. It was about what happens next. Because USA Basketball had a decision to make. They could double down on the old system, prove they didn't need her, assemble a roster of veterans and role players and grind out wins the way they always had. Or they could do something that terrified them more than losing. They could change. 3 days after Caitlin left San Juan, Cheryl Reeve resigned. Not because USA Basketball forced her out. Because she called one of the assistant coaches at midnight and said something that ended up leaked to the press within 6 hours. "I can't coach a team where half the players are wondering if I'm the reason she left." It was the first honest thing anyone from that program had said since this started. And it broke the dam. Within 48 hours, USA Basketball announced a comprehensive review of their selection and coaching processes. Within a week, they'd scheduled listening sessions with current and former players. Within 2 weeks, they'd hired 3 new staff members whose entire job was modernizing how they evaluated talent and built rosters. They didn't call it the Caitlin Clark effect, but everyone knew what it was. One player walked out, and an entire institution had to reckon with why. Caitlin didn't make a public statement for 3 weeks, didn't do interviews, didn't post on social media, didn't engage with the army of reporters camped outside her apartment complex or the think pieces debating whether she destroyed her legacy or defined it. She just went quiet. And that silence was more powerful than anything she could have said. Because while she was quiet, the sport kept talking. Players started sharing their own stories about USA Basketball camps where they felt dismissed, overlooked, or forced into systems that made them worse. Coaches started admitting that maybe the way they'd always done things wasn't the way things should be done anymore. Fans started asking why it took losing the biggest star in the game for anyone to care about fixing what was broken. And slowly, painfully, messily, imperfectly, things started to change. Not because USA Basketball wanted to. Because Caitlin Clark proved they had to. When she finally did speak, it was on her own terms. No press conference. No prepared statement. No carefully managed rollout coordinated with USA Basketball's PR team. Just a 12-minute video posted to her YouTube channel at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. She sat in her living room wearing a college sweatshirt and no makeup, looking exactly like the 22-year-old she was instead of the icon everyone wanted her to be. And she told her story. Not the ESPN version. Not the sanitized narrative. The real one. She talked about showing up to San Juan excited and leaving devastated. About asking for conversations that never happened. About feeling like the system cared more about control than excellence. About the moment she realized staying would mean betraying everything she'd built her career on. She didn't trash Cheryl Reeve. Didn't attack USA Basketball. Didn't demand apologies or resignations or vindication. She just explained what it felt like to be the best at something and still not be heard. And then she said something that became the defining quote of her entire career. "I didn't quit on Team USA. I refused to let Team USA make me quit on myself." The video got 43 million views in 72 hours. And the comments, hundreds of thousands of them, weren't just from basketball fans. They were from women in corporate jobs who'd been told to tone it down, from young athletes who'd been benched for asking questions, from anyone who'd ever been in a room where the people in charge confused compliance with respect. Caitlin Clark's